Seches Bava Kamma Daf Kuf Yud Aleph is the last Amud in the 9th parak and the first Amud in the 10th and final parak of the Masechtas. In the last Amud, we concluded discussion about the Gezel HaGer, which we're returning to Kahanim because the Ger has died and has no Yarshim, and we'll speak about the order in which you bring it and to which Mishmar you bring it to, and we'll give sources for the halachas which we've seen in our last Mishnah. Then we'll start the next parak, which continues the halachas of stolen objects, when you have Yish, what it can be used for, and other related topics. So let's begin. We've seen in our last Mishnah that when someone has stolen something from a ger and he dies, so you can't return it to him, there's still mitzvah sashava, so you have to return it somewhere to someone. So you bring it to the Kahanim in the Beis HaMikdash, and you're bringing two things. You're bringing carbon asham, which has to be brought, as well as you're bringing the stolen object, which needs to be returned. Someone who swore falsely, of course, also has to bring a chaimish. So the Mishnah had said that the asham is meant to be brought second. You first return the stolen object, then you bring the asham. And if you bring the asham before you return the stolen object, it should not be accepted by the mishmar. If they do, it's a problem, and you're not even yaitza. Now the chaimish is not machiv, and the Gemara is going to dig into these halachas. So first we begin with the brisa. So the brisa quotes a machlokes about what happens. Now, the Mishmar is as follows. The first Mishmar is called Yehoyariv, the second one is called Yedaya. They come after Yehoyariv leaves. So Brisa says, if you bring the Asham first, which you're not supposed to do, and you give it to Yehoyariv, and then you bring the money to return, the Karen to return, and you give it to Yedaya, the second Mishmar. So that's not correct, because it's supposed to be given to the same Mishmar. The Torah says that the one who's Makabal, the money, it's besides for the carbon which he's receiving. So, Zamachlekes, what do? According to Rabbi Yehuda, you have to take the money away from Yedaya, the second Mishmar, and bring it to Yehoyariv, the first Mishnah that was Makabel the Asham. Well, I'll explain why. According to Chachamim, you do the opposite. You take the Asham away from Yehoyariv, the first Mishmar, and give it to Yedaya, who has the money, the second Mishmar. So Machlokes is, which one do you fix? Who loses? Do you bring the Asham to the money, bring the money to the Asham? So the Gemara first discusses what's the case, whose Mishmar was on service when you brought it, and who did you give it to? So first the Gemara says, if it was the Mishmar of Yehoyariv when you gave them the Asham, and it was a Mishmar of Yedaya when you gave them the money, so you gave each one in their proper Mishmar, so then each one got what they got. Now, you gave the Asham to Yehoyariv, you gave the money to Yedaya. Rashi says, on the Kashas on Rabbi Yehuda, why would we take the money away from Yedaya and give it to Yehoyariv? Now, Yehoyariv, as we're going to see soon, they did wrong, because they should not have accepted the Asham if the money wasn't returned yet. So according to the Chachamim, we understand, you take the Asham away from them because they did wrong. They shouldn't have accepted. So you can ask them and you give it to Yedaya. But if everyone did the right thing in the right time, so what did Yedaya do wrong? According to Rabbi Yehuda, you take the money away from him and give it to Yehoyariv. So the Gemara gives two answers here. The first answer is Rava. He says we're referring to everything was in the Mishmar of Yehoyariv. You gave the Asham to Yehoyariv first, and then you gave the money to Yedaya during the Mishmar of Yehoyariv. They were not supposed to receive it at all. And that's why there's a knas here, because it wasn't their Mishmar. They should not have accepted it. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says, since it's not their Mishmar, so we knas them, and we take the money away from them and give it to Yehoyariv. The Rabbanan hold, no, Yehoyariv is worse. They should not have been Makabel the Asham, and therefore you'll take the money away from them and give it to Yedaya, and they'll have both the Mishmar, they'll have the Asham as well as the money. Now, the Gemara brings a few brises here that expands on the Shita, specifically Rabbi Yehuda. First one brings a brisa of Rebbe. It says, according to Rabbi Yehuda's Shita, that you're supposed to take the money away from Yedaya and give it to Yehoyariv, the first one. That's only going to work if Yehoyariv has not brought the Karban Asham yet. Then they could wait, give them the money. Now the money's returned, now you could bring the Asham B'Ksheirus. If, however, the Asham was already Karev, there's no point in bringing the money now. The Asham is puzzle if the money hadn't been returned yet. Because the Asham is just chua for the returning of the money. So therefore you have to bring a new Asham. If you're bringing a new Asham, why would you give it to Yehoyariv? So you give it to Yedaya, they have the money. And Yehoyariv got away with the carbon asham that they brought. So Gemara says they got away with it. What's it useful for? It's a puzzle carbon. They can't eat it. What are they going to do with it? So Rambam says they get the skin. At least the skin they can use. Now, the Gemara brings another halacha, and this is two brises, two opposite versions of the same halacha. So the first one, they are each Rebbe. The first one is, Rebbe says, Lefi Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, that you're supposed to take the money away from Yedaya and give it to Yehoyariv. If the Asham is still around, then you do the opposite. You take the Asham away from Yehoyariv and you give it to Yedaya. So that's not what we said in the first price. The first price that we said, and it's only when the Asham is around, we said that you take the Asham away from, you take the money away from Yedaya and you give it to Yehoyariv. Well, here we're saying the opposite. So Gemara answers, according to this version, we're talking about where both Mishmaros finished and left, and neither of them claimed from the other one. So the fact that Yehoyariv did not claim the money from Yedaya means they were meichel the money to Yedaya. If that's true, then they can't bring the carbon themselves. They have to let Yehoyariv bring the carbon. So you take the carbon away from Yehoyariv and you give it to Yedaya. The second version of this brisa says the opposite. Rabbi says, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if the Asham is around, then you take the money and you give it to Yehoyariv. So says, yeah, that's exactly what we said in our original brisa. That's Pasha, that's what his halacha was. Whereas the Chiddush is that this is true even in the case where they finished their mishmaros and they weren't teveah from each other. You would think they were meichel to each other, and therefore each one is allowed to keep what they have, and therefore you could leave the money by Yedaya. Kamash Milan, since no one was teveah anything, it goes back to the Iker halacha, and that's it. You take it away from Yedaya, you take the money from Yedaya, and you give it to Yehoyariv. Okay, now the Gemara goes into the source of the halacha that the asham has to be brought only once the Karen, the stolen, was already returned, that is, was given to the Kehanim. So the Gemara says, what's the makar of that halacha? Rava says, because the pasuk says, ha'asham hamushav Hashem la'kayin movad el hakipurim asher yechaper bay. So this money, the asham refers to the money, is being returned besides for the carbon asham which is brought. And that implies that the money is brought first. It says the money first, you return the money first, and then it's besides for what's going to be brought later. So the Gemara says that someone asked, Hahumi Rabbanan asked. So what about in the case where it says that you bring the carbon Musaf, Milvad Oilas HaBoiker, besides for the Oilas HaBoiker? So that means the Musaf is before the Oilas HaBoiker, before the carbon Tamid Shal Shachar? That's not true. We have a brisa that says nothing comes before the Tamid Shal Shachar. That's always first. And that's derived because it says V'arach Halal Ha'oila. Everything is that the oil is directly on top of the Mizbech. So, and Rava's drasha there is oila. Ha'oila is rishon. That's the first thing. Nothing goes before it. So obviously that drasha is not true there, so it shouldn't be true here. So Rava answers, no, my drasha is not from the fact that it says it first and it says that it's besides what comes later. The fact that it says asher yichaper by lashon future, in future tense lashon asid, it says that which will be atoned, meaning I will bring a carbon asham soon. That's why I'm bringing the Karen now. That means that at the time you're bringing the Karen, the time you're bringing the money, the carbon still has to be future. Now, the Mishnah continues and concludes that the Chaimish is not makif. If he gave the Karen, you could bring the Asham even if he didn't give the Chaimish yet. So what's that from? So the Gemara quotes a brisa which compares the Asham of a stolen object where you swore falsely to the Asham of Me'ila. If somebody uses Hektish inappropriately, he has to pay Hektish back for that. He has to pay Karen. He also has to add a fifth of the value. He has to add Chaimish there as well. The Gemara is going to compare those two sets of halachas and one from one to the other. So the Brisa says, how do you know if somebody brings a Me'ila and he didn't bring the carbon Asham, or if he brings the Asham and he didn't bring the Me'ila, meaning he didn't return the Karen? How do you know that those two things are ma'akiv each other, and he's not the yaitza with just the carbon or just returning the money? So that's because it says be'el ha'asham v'nesachlei. El is the carbon, ha'asham is the stolen, what you took from hektish. You have to return both of those, or bring both of those. Then you have v'nesachlei. Then it'll be forgiven. Now, how do you know that if he brings the asham before returning the mila that he's not yaitza? And that's because it says be'el ha'asham has to be the asham that has already been returned by the time he's bringing the ayil. He's already returned the asham. Just like, now, the Gemara says, just like the carbon and the me'ila, the ayil and the asham are ma'akev each other, that the kapara doesn't come without both of them. What about the chaimish? Maybe that's ma'akev also. So that's because that, the Gemara says, not true, because it says be'el ha'asham v'nislach. You need to have el and the asham. You need to have the carbon and the me'ila returned. And then it's v'nislach even without anything else. You don't need anything else. You don't have to have the chaimish yet for it to be chal the kapara. Now, Says the Gemara, and that's clearly there that the Chaimish is not ma'akev by hektish, and I can learn from hektish to hedyet, and I can learn from hedyet to hektish. Just like by hedyet, the asham means the keren. The word asham there refers to the stolen object. So the word asham by me'ila also refers to the actual thing that was taken from hektish or used without rishus. And just like here, the chaimish is not ma'akev, by hektish, by hedyet also the chaimish is not ma'akev. This concludes the 9th parak of the Masechta, and we start the 10th. The parak begins with a short mission. The mission says that if somebody steals and feeds it to his sons, or he just leaves it for his sons, and now the sons take the object, so those children are parted from having to pay the original owner. And then the Mishnah also says that if it was something that has a lien on it, then they are chayav to pay for it. So the Gemara begins, first quoting halacha of Rav Chizda, that this seems to be a kasha. Rav Chizda said that if Shimon steals something from Reuven is not miyayish, and along comes Levi, and Levi eats it. So who does Reuven go to collect? Someone says he could collect from either one. They both stole it from him. Shimon stole it from him originally. Levi stole it from him secondarily, because as long as Shimon had it, because there was no yish, from Chizis is referring to where Reuven was not miyayish, because there's no yish, it's still in Reuven's property. And Levi comes and eats it, he's at that moment stealing it from Reuven again. So they both stole it, he could collect from either one. So Gemara says that how come in our Mishnah the children don't have to pay the owner as well? Why does it say that if he leaves it for his children and they eat it, they're parted from having to pay? They're stealing directly from the owner at that time. So our answer is very simply, we're talking about after Yish. Since there was Yish and there was a change of Rishus, it's not in the Rishus of the owner at all. It's now in the property of the original thief, which is their father, and therefore he can only claim from the thief, not from the children. Now the Gemara goes into the main halacha of the Mishnah, that the father stole the property and then he left it, which the Gemara explains means that he died and his children were yerushed. They don't have to pay it back to the original owner. So what's the reason for that? So the Gemara gives two explanations. Remember, Bava Kamma says because by inheriting it, it's like they bought it, and this is a halacha rishus yarish rishus lekeach, that a inheritor is like a buyer, and therefore they bought it, and it's yish and shin rishus. It's not stolen in their possession; it is theirs. And Rava says that no, it's not the pshat. Inheriting something is not like purchasing it. It's not considered to be yish and shin rishus. We've already established that it's yish, but this is not called shin rishus. What happened here is that they had already eaten it. And now there's no one that the original owner could claim it from. He can't claim from the thief because the thief is gone. He died. He can't claim from the children because they never stole it. So no one needs to pay him. Now, the Gemara asks, but in the next part of the Mishnah, it says that if it's something which has achrayus on it, which has a lien on it, which the Gemara explains means that everyone sees it and everyone knows about it, even if it's not land, something which is highly visible, like clothing, talis, or an animal that everyone sees. So something like that, they have to return it because of the covet of the father. It's not covet of the father that everyone sees that they have this stolen object and are reminded of his theft. So that's why they have to return it. So that implies that we're talking about a case in the entire Mishnah where the stolen object still exists. It hasn't been eaten, it hasn't been used up. And the Seif is talking about where everyone recognizes it and sees it. The Rish is talking about where it's not a visible thing, it's not something that everyone sees. And that's the difference between the two. The difference is not whether it exists or not, because that's not the contrast between the first case and the second case in the Mishnah. So then, Zakasha and Rava wants to say that we're referring to where it was already used up. That implies that it was not used up. So that the Gemara answers, no. So that Rava answers, no, when it says that it's hiniach lemavim achrayis nechasim, a lien, it doesn't mean something which people can see. Totally different pshat. It means that it's something which actually has a lien. He left them property, he left them land that there are liens on. So therefore, his property that he left them, his real estate, is meshubah to pay back his theft. So there, the original owner can claim it from them because that property has to be used to pay off what the father had stolen from him. So the Gemara asks, this is not true. This is not the right pshat of the Mishnah. The pshat is what we said before. Rebbe explained to his son, Rabbi Shimon, when it says, davar sheish b'achrayis, it means something which people recognize. A cow to plow with, a donkey to drive any of these things, you have to return because of the covenant of the father, like we said before. So that answer is not correct. The Gemara says no. Rava actually will defend his explanation because Rava says when I'm going to die, Rav Oishia is going to come out to greet me because I explained the Mishnah according to him, according to the brisa that he said. Because we have a brisa where Rav Oishia says it the way I explained it. Somebody who steals and feeds it to his children, he's put from having to pay. If he left it for them to inherit, and as Rava said before, the theft still exists, they do have to pay, just like Rava explained it. If the theft does not exist, they're putter. But if he left them property that has a chayis, meaning land, then they do have to pay. Just like Rav explained it, that's how Rav Oishia has it in a brisa. Gemara asks that this new brisa of Rav Oishia should be a kasha on two amarim we brought before, Rav Chizda and Bava Kamma. So first of all, it's a kasha on Rav Chizda, like we said before. Rav Chizda holds that you can collect from the second person who steals from Levi, but here we're not collecting from the children, even though it says here that in one case where the theft is gone, you don't have to pay. That means that they ate it. So it's just like the case of Rav Chizda, and yet we're saying that you can't collect from them. So Gemara says that's Rav Chizda will explain, just like we said before, that we're talking about after Yish, and therefore it belongs to them with the Yish and Shina Rishus. Then the Gemara says the kasha on Bava Kamma. Bava Kamma said Rishus Yeirish ki Rishus Lekeach. Therefore, they're like a buyer, and in the case where we said where the gzela is still around, they are chayav to pay. But why? If it's after Yish and they're a buyer, Yish and Shini Rishos shouldn't have to pay. So Bava Kamma will have to learn differently than Rav Chizda. Bava Kamma will say it's talking about before Yish. So you have Shini Rishos but no Yish, and that's why the halacha is that they do have to pay.